While my husband David celebrates his new promotion with his secretary in Cancun, I'm reviewing the final paperwork for the acquisition of his former company's biggest competitor. As he toasts to new beginnings on his Instagram stories, I'm signing documents that will complete my business empire's expansion into 3 new states. He has no idea that the financially clueless wife he abandoned with $87,000 in hidden debt now controls an industry he couldn't conquer in 15 years of trying. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The irony isn't lost on me as I approve the press release announcing the acquisition. The same hands that once trembled while opening collection notices now confidently direct a company valued at 8 figures. The same mind he dismissed as not business-oriented has engineered the strategic takeover of half the market share in our industry. My name is Emily Chen, and 3 years ago, my life shattered on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was making coffee in our modest kitchen when my phone pinged with a bank alert. Unusual activity detected. The notification showed a $4,800 charge at a jewelry store I'd never heard of. A charge made on our joint credit card that was already precariously close to its limit. I stared at the screen, confused. David's birthday wasn't for months, and our anniversary had passed without acknowledgment from him 2 weeks prior. I called the bank, expecting to report fraud. Instead, the customer service representative read me the last 6 transactions. A hotel booking in Cancun, dinner at an upscale restaurant where David had claimed to be having a client meeting, and first-class airline tickets, all charged within the past 48 hours. "Would you like to dispute these charges, Mrs. Chen?" the representative asked. I nearly said yes, but stopped myself. "No," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "But I would like to set up transaction alerts for all future purchases." After hanging up, I sat at our kitchen table, the coffee forgotten. David had left earlier that morning for what he claimed was a week-long business conference in Chicago. Chicago, not Cancun. A cold realization washed over me. I opened Instagram and checked the profile of his assistant, Jessica, whom he'd hired 6 months ago. A woman whose qualifications seemed limited to her modeling portfolio and surprising willingness to work for below-market salary. Her latest post showed airport cocktails with a cryptic caption, "Adventures await." The airport gate visible in the background wasn't for Chicago. I took a deep breath and didn't call David in a rage. I didn't text him accusations. Instead, I did something he never expected from the English literature graduate he'd married 8 years ago. I began to investigate. Within an hour, I'd logged into our joint email account, the one David insisted we use for household matters, but that he clearly thought I never checked. There they were, flight confirmations, hotel reservations at a 5-star resort in Cancun, and a receipt for a diamond bracelet from a boutique jeweler. All under his name, all paid with our joint funds. The same joint funds that somehow never stretched far enough when I asked about renovating our outdated kitchen or replacing my 10-year-old car. I made myself another cup of coffee and continued my search. It didn't take long to discover the true state of our finances. David hadn't paid our mortgage in 3 months. Credit card statements revealed cash advances and balances approaching their limits. Our savings account, once containing the modest nest egg I'd contributed to faithfully from my teaching salary, was nearly empty. Most shocking of all, I discovered a personal loan in both our names that I'd never agreed to. My signature had been forged on documents establishing a debt of $38,000 with a predatory interest rate. The money had been withdrawn immediately after approval. Where it went, I couldn't yet determine, but it certainly hadn't gone toward our household. My hands were shaking as I compiled everything into a folder. David had always handled the finances, insisting I shouldn't worry my pretty head about such matters. He'd deposit money into my personal account for groceries and small expenses, maintaining tight control over everything else. Whenever I'd asked about our financial situation, he'd grow irritated, telling me that this is why he worked so hard, so I wouldn't have to think about such things. What a convenient arrangement for him. I closed my laptop and gazed around. Our home. It had always felt modest to me, despite David's constant references to his success as regional sales director at Mid-Atlantic Supplies, a mid-sized commercial equipment distributor. He spoke endlessly about deals closed, clients wooed, and territories conquered. Yet our lifestyle never quite matched his claims of professional triumph. Now I understood why. There was a gulf between David's perception of himself and reality. A gulf he'd been filling with debt and deception. That afternoon, instead of calling my friends in tears or confronting David, I drove to the local bank where we held our accounts. I met with a personal banker who was initially reluctant to discuss our joint finances in detail without my husband present. "I understand your concern," I said calmly, sliding across the table my driver's license, marriage certificate, and the loan documentation with my forged signature. "But I've just discovered potential fraud involving our accounts, including what appears to be forgery. Would you prefer I discuss this with your fraud department directly, or perhaps with the police?" The banker's expression changed immediately. Within an hour, I had full access to our account histories, confirmation that David had indeed been moving money systematically from our joint savings into his personal account, and a clearer picture of the financial disaster my husband had created. The debt totaled $87,425, 34 across multiple accounts, not including our underwater mortgage. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a text from David. "Conference session's running late. Don't wait up tonight. We're doing client dinners. Miss you." The casual lies, so easily typed while he was likely sitting poolside with Jessica, ignited something in me. Not just anger, but a cold, clear determination. I wasn't going to confront him while he vacationed with another woman on money we didn't have. I wasn't going to give him the chance to spin more lies or make empty promises. Instead, I drove to see my old college roommate, Rebecca Winters. After graduating with her MBA, Becca had built a successful consulting business helping small companies restructure for growth. She had reached out multiple times over the years, offering me positions that David had always convinced me to decline. "You wouldn't be happy in the corporate world, Em," he'd say. "Besides, once I make director, you won't need to work at all." Becca's office was in a converted industrial building downtown, its exposed brick walls and massive windows a stark contrast to the beige suburban existence I'd been living. She listened without interruption as I laid out my situation, then leaned back in her chair. "Well," she said finally, "you always were the smartest person I knew, Emily. You just let that insecure man convince you otherwise." "I need a job." "Becca," I replied, "something that can help me dig out of this mess." She shook her head. "A job is thinking too small. What you need is a plan." She walked to her whiteboard and picked up a marker. "Mid-Atlantic Supplies, right? Your husband's company?" I nodded, unsure where she was going with this. They're one of 4 major players in the region, mid-sized, family-owned until about 10 years ago. Current management is coasting on reputation rather than innovation. She wrote as she spoke, mapping out the industry landscape. Their biggest weakness is their outdated distribution model and resistance to digital transformation. I stared at her. "How do you know all this?" "I was approached to consult for them last year. Turned it down because their leadership seemed resistant to actual change." She tapped the marker against the board. "Their main competitor, River Edge Supply Chain, has better technology but struggles with customer retention. Then there's Summit Distribution and Barrett Commercial. Both have strengths, but significant gaps in service offerings." She turned to me, eyes gleaming with the look I remembered from our college days, the look that usually preceded some audacious scheme. Emily, do you know what happens when someone understands both the strengths and weaknesses of all players in a fragmented industry? When I didn't answer, she continued, they can identify the precise gaps where a new competitor could enter and disrupt everything. I shook my head. Becca, I'm an English teacher with an underwater mortgage and massive debt. I'm not starting a company. No, she agreed. Not yet. First, you're going to become the industry expert no one sees coming. Then you're going to build exactly what these established players are too complacent to create. That night, I slept on Becca's couch, my mind racing with the seed of an idea that felt simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. The next morning, I didn't call David to demand explanations. Instead, I called a lawyer Becca recommended, Claire Wilson, who specialized in both divorce and business law. Document everything, Claire advised after hearing my situation. Don't confront him yet. Don't give him any reason to suspect you're making moves. We need time to track the money, protect what assets remain, and position you properly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Position me for what? I asked. For whatever you decide comes next, she replied. Divorce, certainly. But also, perhaps, for the business opportunity your friend outlined. It's rather brilliant, actually. Over the next 2 days, I gathered documents, opened new bank accounts in my name only, and began cataloging our assets, what few remained. I took photos of everything in our home, made copies of all financial records I could find, and started a detailed timeline of David's deceptions, going back as far as I could trace. Throughout this process, David continued his charade, texting about exhausting conference sessions and networking events, even as Jessica's increasingly brazen Instagram posts showed glimpses of their getaway. She was careful never to show David's face, but his watch was visible in one photo, his distinctive phone case in another. On the third day, Becca introduced me to Michael Torres, a venture capitalist who had funded several of her clients' businesses. I'm intrigued by your perspective on the industry, he said, after I'd explained my nascent idea for a new kind of supply chain company combining digital efficiency with personalized service. But more than that, I'm impressed by your composure. Under extraordinary circumstances, that kind of steady judgment can't be taught. I haven't done anything yet, I pointed out. On the contrary, he countered, you've already demonstrated the most critical quality of successful entrepreneurs, the ability to see opportunity where others see only crisis. By the end of the week, while David was still sending daily lies about his fictional Chicago conference, I had assembled a small but powerful team. Becca as strategic advisor, Claire as legal counsel, Michael as potential investor, and surprisingly, Maria Gutierrez, a former executive from River Edge who had recently been passed over for promotion, in favor of a less qualified man. When Becca called, I was skeptical, Maria admitted during our first meeting. But your analysis of the industry's gaps is spot on. I've been thinking along similar lines for years, but lacked the backing to make a move. Together, we began crafting not just a business plan, but a comprehensive strategy to enter the market in a way that would specifically target the weaknesses of existing players, including mid-Atlantic supplies. Sunday evening, as David was due to return from his conference, I moved the last of my essential belongings to a small apartment Becca had helped me find. I left the house exactly as it had been, except for a single manila envelope on the kitchen table containing copies, not originals, of his Cancun itinerary, Jessica's Instagram posts, and bank statements highlighting his theft from our joint accounts. I included a brief note. I know everything. Don't contact me. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. Then I blocked his number, removed myself from our joint social media accounts, and began the next chapter of my life. Claire filed divorce papers the following morning, citing fraud and infidelity, with evidence attached. By noon, my phone was blowing up with messages from mutual friends and David's family members, some expressing shock and sympathy, others demanding my side of whatever story David had concocted. I responded to none of them. Instead, I spent that day in a conference room with my new team, outlining what would become Nexus Supply Solutions, a company designed specifically to address the pain points David had complained about in his own industry for years. The very problems he'd claimed were just the way things are and impossible to solve became the foundation of our business model. For the next 6 months, while my divorce proceedings crawled forward, slowed by David's desperate attempts to hide assets that weren't even there, I worked 16-hour days learning everything about the industry. Maria proved invaluable, teaching me the intricacies of supply chain management, customer relationship building, and pricing strategies. Becca guided our overall business development, while Michael connected us with potential clients who were frustrated with the status quo. By the time my divorce was finalized, leaving me with full responsibility for half our marital debt but complete freedom from David, Nexus Supply Solutions had secured seed funding, developed proprietary software to streamline ordering and fulfillment, and signed our first 3 clients. Small clients, yes, but strategic ones. Companies that had previously worked with Mid-Atlantic but had grown dissatisfied with their rigid systems and poor customer service. Companies that, as we would later learn, had specifically dealt with David and found him more focused on commissions than solutions. I took no pleasure in learning that David had been placed on performance improvement plan at Mid-Atlantic following his return from Cancun. Jessica had been quietly transferred to another department after rumors of their affair spread through the company. His carefully constructed image of success was crumbling, not because of anything I'd done, but because of his own choices. Our company grew steadily over the next year. We remained small but nimble, targeting specific market segments where the established players were weakest. When Barrett Commercial abruptly closed after their CEO's retirement, we moved quickly to acquire their client list and hire their best talent. When Summit Distribution fumbled a major software implementation, we were there with a seamless alternative. And when RiverEdge Supply Chain began exploring acquisition targets to strengthen their position against industry leader Mid-Atlantic Supplies, Maria's connections gave us advance notice and an opportunity to present ourselves as a strategic partner. Rather than a competitor, the merger with RiverEdge was transformative. Overnight, Nexus went from promising startup to significant market player. I went from founder to chief innovation officer of the combined entity, with equity that valued my stake at 7 figures. Our digital-first approach became the core of RiverEdge's modernization strategy, with Maria and me leading the integration. It was during this period that I first heard news of David through industry channels. Mid-Atlantic Supplies was struggling, losing market share to more innovative competitors, including, now, the RiverEdge Nexus powerhouse. David had been passed over for promotion twice more. His once promising career stalled. According to rumors, he had developed a reputation for blaming others for his failures, for making grandiose claims he couldn't fulfill, and for costly judgment errors. In other words, for being exactly who he'd always been, just without me there to provide cover for his inadequacies. 2 years after I'd discovered his betrayal, RiverEdge Nexus had grown to become Mid-Atlantic's principal challenger in the market. Our combined innovations had disrupted the industry's complacent status quo, forcing even the largest players to adapt or decline. We'd expanded into 3 new states, doubling our revenue year over year. And then came the opportunity we hadn't dared hope for so soon. Mid-Atlantic Supply's parent company, facing pressure from shareholders over declining performance, began exploring strategic alternatives, corporate speak for putting themselves up for sale. The negotiations were intense and complex, lasting over 6 months. I was part of our acquisition team, reviewing Mid-Atlantic's financials, operations, and personnel structure. Their books revealed exactly what Maria had suspected: years of underinvestment. In technology, over-reliance on a declining customer base, and a corporate culture resistant to change. During due diligence, I deliberately kept my connection to David private. Not because I feared the association, but because I wanted nothing to taint the business decision with personal history. This acquisition made perfect strategic sense regardless of my past. When the purchase agreement was finalized, however, I couldn't help but appreciate the symmetry of the moment. The company where David had built his career, the company he'd used as justification for years of condescension toward my professional capabilities, would now be part of the organization where I served as an executive. The morning of the announcement, I sat in my office reviewing the press release one final time. My phone lit up with a LinkedIn notification. David Chen had viewed my profile. I could imagine his reaction, seeing my title and company, realizing that the wife he'd dismissed as financially naive was now helping orchestrate. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very behaviors that had characterized David's approach throughout his career, overpromising, under-delivering, and cutting ethical corners, were finally catching up with him in ways he couldn't charm or talk his way out of. This time, the consequences weren't a disappointed wife or frustrated colleague, but shareholders and board members watching their investment underperform. Keep me updated on any formal actions, I instructed Michael. Not for personal reasons, but because we should be prepared if there are any legal or competitive implications for our clients. He nodded understanding. Of course, strictly business considerations. And that was true, mostly. While I couldn't deny a certain sense of karmic justice in David's professional struggles, my primary focus remained on our company's continued growth and success, not his failures. The following weeks brought increasing momentum to our integration efforts. The quarterly financial results, our first since completing the acquisition, exceeded analyst expectations, with synergies materializing faster than projected and client retention rates remaining exceptional. Our stock price responded accordingly, rising 15% in a single day following the earnings announcement. Amid this professional success, Jonathan and I had been thoughtfully exploring both the business partnership between our companies and the personal logistics of his potential relocation to Seattle. After careful consideration of various options, we had arrived at an elegant solution, a bi-coastal relationship supported by regular travel and shared workspaces in both cities, combined with a strategic alliance between our companies that would benefit both organizations. The Tech Dynamics board approved the partnership framework this morning, Jonathan reported during our evening video call. His excitement was evident even through the screen. Their CEO specifically mentioned your acquisition integration success as a key factor in their confidence about working with RiverEdge Nexus. That's wonderful news, I replied sincerely, for both the business opportunity and our personal arrangements. I've been researching properties in Boston that would make sense as a part-time base for me, he continued, and I've identified several potential office spaces where your team could establish a satellite presence in Seattle when working on the collaboration. This thoughtful approach to our dual challenge, finding solutions that addressed both professional opportunities and personal connections, reinforced my conviction that we had built a relationship founded on mutual respect and authentic partnership. 2 days later, as I was reviewing the implementation plan for our Tech Dynamics Alliance, Maria appeared in my doorway with an unexpected visitor, Jessica Davis. "Sorry to interrupt," Maria began, "but Jessica has information you need to hear." Immediately, Jessica stepped forward, her expression serious. "Ms. Chen, I've just received a concerning call from my contact at Keller Manufacturing. Summit's sales team is sharing proprietary information about our internal systems and integration timeline with clients, details that could only have come from someone with inside knowledge of our post-acquisition plans." I set down my pen, giving them my full attention. Specific examples? Detailed transition dates for our technology platform rollout, projected downtime windows that we haven't publicly disclosed, and even internal cost structures that could be used to undercut our pricing, Jessica explained, handing me a document with the concerning details highlighted. My contact was uncomfortable with receiving this information and wanted us to be aware of the situation. This goes beyond normal competitive intelligence, Maria added. The specificity suggests access to confidential integration documents. I studied the information carefully. The details were indeed concerning, exactly the kind of sensitive implementation data that could create client uncertainty during a critical transition period. Have you identified the potential source of this leak? I asked. Maria and Jessica exchanged glances before Jessica responded. Based on who would have had access to this specific information, we believe it's likely David. The timing coincides with his demotion at Summit, possibly an attempt to prove his value by delivering competitive intelligence. I took a deep breath, considering the implications. If true, this represented more than just aggressive competition. It was potentially illegal misappropriation of confidential information, possibly violating the terms of his severance agreement. We need to address this immediately, but carefully, I decided. First, accelerate our client communication about the integration timeline. Get ahead of any uncertainty this might create. Second, have legal review what specific confidentiality provisions might have been violated. Third, conduct a digital forensic review to identify any unauthorized access to our systems. Maria nodded. Already initiated the first two. The forensic team can start tomorrow morning. One more thing, Jessica added hesitantly. David has been reaching out to several former Mid-Atlantic employees who joined our integration team, apparently fishing for additional inside information. Everyone has declined, but his attempts are becoming more persistent. This pattern was disturbingly familiar, David growing increasingly desperate as his professional promises failed to deliver, reaching for shortcuts and ethical compromises rather than addressing fundamental issues. The same behavior that had characterized his response to financial pressures during our marriage was now manifesting in his professional crisis. Document all contact attempts, I instructed. If he's directly soliciting confidential information, that crosses a clear legal line. After they left, I sat quietly for a moment, absorbing this unexpected development. Despite my emphasis on moving forward rather than looking back, it seemed David was determined to insert himself into my professional narrative one way or another. His inability to accept his own failure without attempting to undermine my success spoke volumes about the fundamental character issues that had ultimately doomed both our marriage and his career trajectory. The next morning brought confirmation of our suspicions. The digital forensics team discovered that David had accessed confidential integration documents through his Mid-Atlantic credentials during his final days before resignation. Documents he had no legitimate business reason to review given his regional sales role. The access logs are unambiguous, our head of IT security explained, showing me the detailed records. He downloaded internal planning documents, implementation timelines, and confidential client transition schedules, all after accepting the position at Summit, but before his departure was announced. Our legal counsel, who had joined the briefing, nodded grimly. This constitutes a clear violation of his employment agreement, confidentiality provisions, and potentially federal laws regarding corporate espionage and trade secrets. What are our options? I asked, maintaining my professional composure despite the personal dimension of this situation. We could pursue civil action for breach of contract and misappropriation of confidential information, he advised. We could also refer the matter to federal authorities for potential criminal investigation, though that path involves less direct control over the process. And the business implications of either approach? I pressed, focusing on the strategic, rather than emotional considerations. A civil case keeps the matter more contained but might drag on for months or years. A criminal referral would eventually become public, creating potential market uncertainty, but possibly delivering a more decisive resolution. I considered these options carefully, weighing not just legal strategies, but also business priorities, client considerations, and even impact on employee morale. David's actions required a response, but that response needed to align with our company's best interests, not my personal history with him. Prepare for both options, I decided. But before we proceed with either, I want to attempt one intermediate step. Schedule a meeting with Summit's general counsel and CEO. No lawyers present from our side, just me. Let's see if we can resolve this at the executive level before escalating formally. My legal counsel looked surprised. That's an unusual approach, given the circumstances. This is an unusual situation, I acknowledged. But sometimes direct communication between principals can achieve what formal legal processes cannot. If nothing else, it gives Summit leadership a chance to address this internally before it becomes a public legal battle that damages both companies. The meeting was arranged for the following afternoon, a discreet conversation at a neutral location with just Summit's CEO, their general counsel, and myself present. No assistants, no note takers, no formal agenda beyond addressing matters of mutual concern. I arrived early, selecting a seat that allowed me to observe both men as they entered the private dining room of an upscale restaurant known for its discretion. Jackson Mercer, Summit's CEO, was a veteran industry figure known for his traditional approach and risk aversion. Harold Weinstein, their general counsel, had a reputation for pragmatism and business-oriented problem-solving rather than legal aggressiveness. After brief introductions and polite preliminaries, I moved directly to the purpose of our meeting. Gentlemen, I've requested this conversation because we've identified a serious situation that I believe requires immediate attention. Ideally, without formal legal proceedings that would benefit neither of our organizations. I placed a sealed folder on the table but didn't open it. We have conclusive evidence that David Chen accessed and removed confidential integration documents in his final days at Mid-Atlantic. Documents he is now using to target our clients with Summit's competitive offerings. Jackson Mercer's expression remained carefully neutral, but a slight tightening around his eyes suggested this wasn't entirely news to him. Harold Weinstein reached for his water glass, buying a moment to compose his response. "Those are serious allegations, Ms. Chen," Weinstein began. "Without seeing your evidence..." I raised a hand slightly. "I'm not here to present evidence for your evaluation, Mr. Weinstein. I'm here to offer a professional courtesy before we proceed with formal action. The evidence exists, it's conclusive, and it would support both civil and criminal proceedings." Mercer leaned forward slightly. "What exactly are you proposing, Ms. Chen?" "A clean resolution that protects both companies' interests," I replied evenly. "Summit conducts its own internal investigation, terminates Mr. Chen's employment for cause, retrieves all misappropriated materials, and provides written certification that no copies remain within your organization. In exchange, River Edge Nexus agrees not to pursue formal legal action or make the matter public." Weinstein frowned. "You're essentially asking us to terminate an employee based solely on your claim of misconduct." "I'm offering you the opportunity to address misconduct internally before it becomes a legal matter that neither of us can control," I corrected. "Your internal investigation will quickly confirm what I've outlined. The choice is whether you handle this quietly now or publicly later." Mercer studied me carefully. "This seems unusually personal, Ms. Chen. I understand you and Mr. Chen have some history." I met his gaze directly. "Our history is irrelevant to the current situation. If it were relevant, I wouldn't be here offering a discreet resolution. I'd have simply filed the civil complaint and federal referral already prepared by our legal team." That statement hung in the air for a moment as both men absorbed its implications. I had intentionally revealed that our legal response was not merely theoretical but fully developed and ready for immediate implementation. "May I ask a direct question?" Mercer said finally. How confident are you in your evidence? Absolutely certain, I replied without hesitation. Digital access logs, forensic recovery of deleted files, witness statements from clients who received confidential information, and documentation of his attempts to solicit additional data from current employees. All admissible, all conclusive. Weinstein exchanged a glance with his CEO before responding. We'll need 48 hours to conduct our own review. You have 24, I countered calmly. Our formal filings are prepared and will proceed. Automatically if we don't receive confirmation of your internal action by this time tomorrow. As I stood to leave, Mercer asked one final question that revealed more than perhaps he intended. This resolution you're proposing, was it your idea or your legal team's? Mine, I answered honestly. They recommended immediate legal action. I preferred to offer a business solution first, despite the personal history involved. Professional. Considerations should outweigh personal ones, don't you agree? Without waiting for his response, I gathered my belongings and departed, leaving the sealed folder on the table. It contained only a fraction of our evidence, enough to convince them of the seriousness of our claim without revealing our full legal strategy. The following morning, precisely 23 hours after our meeting concluded, my assistant delivered a hand courier package from Summit Distribution. Inside was a formal letter signed by both Mercer and Weinstein. Dear Ms. Chen, following. Our discussion yesterday, Summit Distribution has completed an internal investigation into the matters you raised. Based on our findings, we have terminated David Chen's employment, effective immediately for violation of company policies regarding competitive information and ethical business practices. All materials identified as potentially originating from River Edge Nexus or Mid-Atlantic supplies have been secured and will be returned to your legal department under separate cover. We have implemented additional safeguards to ensure no copies remain within our systems or records. Summit Distribution remains committed to ethical business competition and regrets this unfortunate situation. We appreciate your professional courtesy in allowing us to address this matter internally. Regards, Jackson Mercer, CEO Harold Weinstein, General Counsel. I forwarded the letter to our legal team with a brief note. Resolution achieved. Monitor for compliance but suspend all preparation for formal action. Within the hour, news of David's termination from Summit began circulating through industry channels. The official announcement cited only violation of company policies without specific details, but the timing and abruptness spoke volumes to those familiar with recent competitive dynamics. By mid-afternoon, my phone lit up with a text from Becca. Just heard about David. Summit's loss is karma's gain. Dinner tonight to celebrate? I declined politely, explaining that I had an important video call with Jonathan to finalize details of our bi-coastal arrangement. The truth was, I felt no particular desire to celebrate David's downfall. His termination wasn't a personal victory, but the natural consequence of his own choices and actions, the predictable outcome of patterns that had characterized his approach to both personal and professional relationships. That evening, as Jonathan and I discussed logistics for his upcoming move and my first extended visit to Seattle, he noticed my unusually contemplative mood. Everything okay? You seem distracted. I shared the day's developments, including Summit's swift action in response to our evidence. It's an objectively positive outcome for the company, I concluded. We've neutralized a competitive threat without the distraction and expense of litigation. But, Jonathan prompted gently. But I keep thinking about the pattern, I admitted. 3 years ago, David betrayed our marriage through deception and financial manipulation. Now he's lost his career through essentially the same behaviors, different context, identical underlying issues. You sound almost sad about it, Jonathan observed, no judgment in his tone. I considered this assessment. Not sad exactly. More. I don't know. Contemplative? There's something sobering about watching someone repeatedly self-destruct because they can't recognize their own destructive patterns. That's compassion, Jonathan suggested. Not for what he did, but for his inability to grow beyond his limitations. It speaks well of you, Emily. His words resonated with an emotional truth I hadn't fully articulated. Whatever damage David had inflicted on my life and our marriage, I had transcended it to build something stronger and more authentic. He remained trapped in the same patterns, suffering the same consequences in progressively more damaging contexts. The empire I had built, both professionally and personally, wasn't founded on his destruction, but on my own growth beyond the limitations he had tried to impose. The contrast between our trajectories wasn't a scorecard of revenge, but a testament to the power of authentic values over superficial appearances. 2 days later, as I reviewed the final implementation plan for our Tech Dynamics partnership, Maria appeared in my doorway with Jessica beside her again, but this time with very different expressions than during their previous urgent visit. "We have updates on 2 interesting developments," Maria began, her tone deliberately casual. "First, the last of the confidential materials has been returned from Summit, with certification that no copies remain in their possession." "Good." I nodded. "That matter is officially closed then." "Second," Jessica continued, barely containing her enthusiasm, "we've just received confirmation that Keller Manufacturing wants to expand their relationship with us, not just maintaining their existing business, but adding 3 additional product lines previously sourced from competitors." I raised an eyebrow, surprised by this significant expansion from a client we'd been worried about losing just months earlier. "What prompted the change?" "Apparently, they were impressed by how we handled the recent situation," Jessica explained. "Not just our technology and service improvements since the acquisition, but our professional approach to competitive challenges. Their procurement director specifically mentioned appreciating that we focused on delivering value rather than disparaging competitors." The contrast to David's approach couldn't have been clearer. Where he had attempted to win business through insider information and undermining competitors, we had succeeded by demonstrating superior value and professional integrity. "That's excellent news," I acknowledged. "Draft an implementation plan for the expanded relationship and we'll review it tomorrow." After they left, I turned back to my window, gazing out at the Boston skyline as afternoon shadows lengthened across the financial district. In the reflection of the glass, I could see my office, the space I had earned through vision and persistence rather than inheritance or connection. On my desk sat the crystal vase Jonathan had given me, symbols of modern leadership books on my shelves, the afternoon sun catching the subtle highlights in my hair that now included a few strands of silver I had chosen not to color. This moment, this culmination of professional achievement, personal growth, and authentic relationships had seemed impossible 3 years ago when I discovered David's betrayal. Standing in our kitchen, holding that bank alert notification, I had seen only devastation and insurmountable debt. I couldn't have imagined that his abandonment would become the foundation upon which I would build an empire. My phone chimed, softly with a calendar reminder. 30 minutes until my video conference with Jonathan and the Tech Dynamics team to finalize our partnership framework. Another step forward in the continuing expansion of both my professional reach and personal fulfillment. As I gathered my notes for the meeting, I realized that the ghost of David Chen no longer haunted these moments. Not as an obstacle to overcome, not as a wound to heal, not even as a cautionary tale to remember. His betrayal had become merely the unexpected catalyst for a journey I might otherwise never have undertaken. A footnote rather than a defining chapter in my story. The conference call with Tech Dynamics proved productive and energizing. Their executive team shared our vision for integrating supply chain and manufacturing technologies in ways that would create unprecedented efficiencies for clients in both our sectors. As the meeting concluded, their CEO made a comment that resonated deeply. What impresses me most about River Edge Nexus isn't just your technological innovation, Ms. Chen. It's how you've navigated transformation, both the corporate integration and your own professional evolution. That capacity for reinvention is exactly what we want in a strategic partner. After the call ended, I remained at my desk, reflecting on his observation. Reinvention, transformation. These weren't merely business strategies, but personal philosophies that had carried me from devastation to empire building. The ability to envision something new amidst the ruins of what had been destroyed. My contemplation was interrupted by a text message from an unknown number. "Emily, please, we need to talk. David." I stared at the message, momentarily disoriented by this intrusion. From the past. After everything, the affair, the financial deception, the professional sabotage, and his ultimate termination, David still believed he was entitled to my attention, still framed his desire as a need, still positioned himself as the protagonist, in a narrative where I should respond to his requirements. Some patterns truly never changed. I deleted the message without responding and returned to my preparation for the next day's executive committee meeting, where we would review the Tech Dynamics partnership framework and establish implementation timelines. This future, shaped by authentic achievement rather than reaction to betrayal, deserved my full focus and energy. The following weeks unfolded with increasing momentum. Our integration of Mid-Atlantic was now substantially complete, with operational synergies exceeding initial projections. The Tech Dynamics partnership was moving forward rapidly, with Jonathan expertly orchestrating their side of the collaboration while we established our Seattle satellite office. Our personal bi-coastal arrangement was finding its rhythm as well. While the distance presented logistical challenges, they were offset by the quality of our time together and the shared excitement of building something meaningful in both our personal and professional domains. One evening, as I packed for my first extended stay in Seattle, my phone rang with a call from Maria. "Sorry to bother you after hours," she began, "but I thought you should know. David Chen has apparently joined Barrett Financial Services as a strategic consultant." Barrett was a mid-sized regional firm that provided financing for commercial equipment purchases, essentially serving the clients who bought the products our company sold. Not a direct competitor, but adjacent to our industry in ways that could be either beneficial or problematic depending on their approach. "Interesting pivot," I observed, continuing to fold clothes into my suitcase. "Their commercial lending division works with several of our major clients." "That's my concern," Maria confirmed. Given his recent history, I wondered if we should alert our client relationship managers about potential complications. I considered this carefully, appreciating Maria's discretion in bringing the matter directly to me rather than initiating action based on our past experience with David. Let's not overreact, I decided. Barrett is a reputable firm with strong compliance protocols. Monitor the situation, but no proactive measures unless we see actual problematic behavior. "You're not worried?" Maria sounded mildly surprised. "About David specifically?" "No," I replied honestly. "He'll either adapt to Barrett's professional standards or repeat his pattern and face similar consequences. Either way, it's not our concern, unless it directly impacts our client relationships." After we hung up, I realized how completely my perspective had evolved. 3 years ago, news of David's professional movements would have triggered intense emotional reactions: anger, anxiety, perhaps even fear. Now it registered as merely a data point to be noted and monitored like any other potential business factor. The empire I had built extended beyond balance sheets and market share to include emotional sovereignty, the ability to process information objectively without being controlled by past wounds or reactive patterns. 2 days later, I arrived in Seattle for my first 3-week stay in the condo. Jonathan and I had leased near both the Tech Dynamics headquarters and our new satellite office. The space reflected our shared aesthetic, modern but warm, functional but personal, with large windows overlooking the water and mountains beyond. As I settled in, arranging my workspace and unpacking personal items, I was struck by how natural this transition felt. Unlike the upheaval that had initiated my journey 3 years ago, this evolution was chosen rather than forced, expansive rather than diminishing. My first week in Seattle established productive rhythms both professionally and personally. The River Edge Nexus satellite team was small but talented, focused on developing the technical integrations that would connect our supply chain platform with Tech Dynamics manufacturing systems. The proximity to their headquarters facilitated collaborative sessions that would have been difficult to manage remotely. In the evenings, Jonathan and I explored the city, discovering neighborhood restaurants, walking along the waterfront, and gradually building connections in this shared second home. The balanced independence of our bi-coastal arrangement suited us both, respecting our established professional domains while creating space for a relationship that enhanced rather than constrained either partner. "This is working better than I expected," Jonathan observed one evening as we sat on our balcony watching the sunset paint the Olympic mountains in shades of gold and purple. "I was worried the distance would feel like separation, but somehow it feels like expansion instead." His observation captured precisely what made our relationship different from my marriage to David. Where David had seen my independence as threatening, Jonathan recognized it as complementary to his own. Where David had demanded compromise, Jonathan sought synergy. The result was a partnership that magnified possibilities rather than limiting them. Midway through my Seattle stay, I received an unexpected email from Thomas Mitchell, who had remained with the integrated company as our chief operating officer. "Emily, something unusual came across my desk today that I thought you should be aware of. Barrett Financial has been contacting several of our major clients, offering preferential financing terms for equipment purchases, but with unusual conditions attached. Specifically, they're requiring clients to share detailed information about our implementation timelines, service agreements, and pricing structures as part of their risk assessment process. Given recent history, this raised red flags. I've asked our client relationship managers to gather more information without creating undue concern. Thomas." I forwarded the email to Maria with a brief note. "The pattern emerges again. Let's discuss options when I return next week." Her response came quickly, "Already investigating. Preliminary findings suggest these requirements are unique to Barrett's commercial division, not company-wide policy. Limited to regions where David has direct involvement. Some behaviors were so deeply ingrained they appeared almost compulsive. David, repeatedly attempting to gain competitive advantage through manipulation and information exploitation, rather than legitimate value creation. Different company, different industry position, identical approach. I prepared a measured response strategy with our client relationship and legal teams, not an aggressive defense against David's latest maneuvers, but a straightforward education of our clients about data security, best practices, and contractual confidentiality provisions. Our approach focused on protecting clients' interests rather than targeting David or Barrett directly. Within days, several clients reported declining Barrett's unusual financing requirements, recognizing them as potentially problematic from their own risk management perspective. Some even expressed concern about Barrett's ethical standards based on these information demands. The situation resolved itself without direct confrontation or legal action. A quiet affirmation that legitimate business practices would ultimately prevail over manipulative tactics, regardless of who employed them. My final week in Seattle coincided with Tech Dynamics' quarterly board meeting, where Jonathan would be formally introduced as their new CFO. He had invited me to attend the dinner following the board session, a significant professional milestone we both wanted to share. As I dressed for the evening, selecting a midnight blue dress that projected both confidence and elegance, my phone buzzed with a text from Becca. Just heard something interesting. Barrett Financial placed David on administrative leave pending an ethics investigation. Sound familiar? I set the phone down without responding immediately, feeling an unexpected wave of emotion that wasn't quite pity, but something adjacent to it. Perhaps recognition of the tragic predictability of David's self-sabotage. 3 companies in less than a year, each ending in some variation of the same pattern. Over-promising, unethical tactics, discovery, consequences. At the Tech Dynamics dinner that evening, surrounded by innovative industry leaders discussing technological transformations and market opportunities, I found myself reflecting on the stark contrast between this environment of collaborative growth and the manipulative competition that characterized David's approach to business and relationships. The board chairman raised his glass in a toast to Jonathan, highlighting his financial expertise and strategic vision. As applause filled the room, Jonathan's gaze found mine across the table, a shared moment of recognition for the journey that had brought us both to this point of professional achievement and personal connection. Later that night, back in our condo overlooking the moonlit water, Jonathan asked about my momentary distraction during the evening. "You seemed elsewhere for a few minutes during dinner. Everything okay?" I shared the news about David's latest professional setback, explaining my complex reaction. "It's not satisfaction or vindication," I clarified. "More like witnessing the inevitable conclusion of a tragic cycle. He keeps recreating the same scenario with increasingly serious consequences." Jonathan listened thoughtfully. "What strikes me is the contrast between his trajectory and yours, both starting from the same moment of rupture 3 years ago, but moving in completely different directions." "Different foundations," I suggested. "He built on appearance, I built on substance. He focused on shortcuts, I invested in sustainable growth. He manipulated perceptions, I created actual value." "The empire versus the illusion," Jonathan summarized, wrapping his arm around my shoulders as we looked out at the Seattle skyline. "I'm partial to the empire, personally." I smiled, leaning into his embrace. "Me too." The following weekend, as I prepared to return to Boston, I received one final message related to David, this time from Jessica Davis. "Thought you should know that Barrett has formally terminated David's consulting arrangement following their ethics investigation. Industry sources suggest this may be his last chance in our sector. Just closing the chapter." And it did feel like the closing of a chapter, not just in David's professional story, but in my own relationship to that period of my life. Whatever lingering connections had existed between us, whatever remaining threads of shared history had somehow continued to entangle our separate paths, seemed finally and completely severed. On the flight back to Boston, I opened my laptop to review the quarterly performance reports for the integrated company. The numbers told a compelling story. Revenue growth exceeding projections, profit margins expanding as operational efficiencies materialized, client retention at historic highs, and employee satisfaction metrics that validated our approach to cultural integration. These were the measurable outcomes of the empire I had built from the ruins of betrayal and debt. Not a revenge fantasy come to life, but a testament to the power of authentic vision over reactive desperation. Not a response to David's abandonment, but a creation that had transcended its catalyzing circumstances to become something valuable in its own right. As the plane began its descent into Boston, city lights spreading beneath us like a constellation of possibilities, I closed my laptop and gazed out at the familiar skyline. Somewhere in those patterns of light was the office tower where I had established my professional identity, the apartment that had become my personal sanctuary, the team that had helped transform an idea into an industry-changing reality. My empire. Built not despite David's betrayal, but because of the freedom and focus it had ultimately granted me. The debt he had left me with had been repaid many times over. Not to him, but to myself. in the currency of authenticity, achievement, and growth that truly mattered. 3 years ago, standing in my kitchen staring at evidence of betrayal, I couldn't have imagined this outcome. I couldn't have seen how complete devastation would reveal foundational strength I didn't know I possessed. I couldn't have anticipated that the man who left me with nothing but debt would inadvertently set me on the path to building an empire he could never have helped me create. The irony wasn't lost on me, but it no longer defined me. I had moved beyond reaction to creation, beyond survival to flourishing, beyond recovery to reinvention. The empire stood on its own merits now, a testament not to what had been lost, but to what had been discovered and built in the aftermath. As the plane touched down on Boston soil, I felt the familiar sense of homecoming, not to a place defined by past wounds, but to a life I had deliberately crafted, an identity I had authentically claimed, and a future limited only by the scope of my own vision rather than someone else's limitations. David had left me with nothing but debt. He didn't expect me to build an empire while he was gone. His underestimation had been my liberation. His betrayal had been my beginning. His departure had made room for my arrival, not as the woman he had abandoned, but as the leader, partner, and person I was always capable of becoming. The empire I had built wasn't merely a business achievement or professional milestone. It was the tangible manifestation of a profound personal truth. Sometimes being left with nothing creates the perfect foundation for building everything you truly want. As I gathered my belongings and prepared to disembark, my phone lit up with a message from Jonathan. Safe travels. Boston office team planning welcome lunch tomorrow. Seattle counting days until your return. Me too. I smiled, stepping confidently into the jetway. From debt to empire. From abandonment to authentic partnership. From devastation to deliberate creation. Every journey begins with a catalyst. Mine happened to be betrayal. But the destination, this life I had built, this person I had become, this future I continued to create, that was entirely of my own design. And for that unexpected gift of self-discovery and authentic achievement, I could almost thank the man who had underestimated me so completely that he inadvertently set me free to build an empire beyond his imagination while he was gone. Surprisingly, no, I admitted. She's genuinely talented and clearly committed to rebuilding her professional reputation. Whatever happened in her personal life with David seems entirely separate from her professional contributions now. Much like you've separated your past with him from your current success, Jonathan observed. I smiled, recognizing the parallel. I suppose you're right. We've both moved beyond being defined by our connection to him. Though in radically different ways, Jonathan added, raising his wine glass in a small toast. You built an empire. That takes extraordinary vision and resilience. The word empire caught me by surprise. I'd been so focused on the day-to-day building, first surviving, then strategizing, then executing, that I rarely stepped back to see the totality of what I'd created. From a desperate woman facing insurmountable debt to the executive leading a market-transforming acquisition. From financial naivety to industry leadership. From betrayed wife to architect of my own destiny. Empire. Yes, perhaps that was the right word after all. The following Monday morning brought news that shifted our integration focus significantly. Summit Distribution had issued a press release announcing their new client reclamation initiative in the Midwest region, led by their recent hire, David Chen. The announcement specifically named 5 major mid-Atlantic accounts they were targeting with aggressive pricing and service packages. They're moving faster than we anticipated, Maria noted as we reviewed the announcement in my office. David must have provided them with detailed information about contract renewal dates and pain points, which raises questions about what confidentiality provisions he might have violated, Michael added, joining our impromptu strategy session. Legal is reviewing options, but proving specific violations could be challenging. I studied the list of targeted accounts, all longtime Mid-Atlantic clients with whom David had cultivated close personal relationships. We need to get ahead of this. Full assessment of each account's status, accelerated rollout of enhanced services, where possible, and direct outreach from senior leadership. Jessica's already drafting client-specific retention plans for each of these accounts, Maria reported. She anticipated this move after hearing about David's new role. I nodded, impressed but not surprised by her proactive approach. Let's convene the full retention task force this afternoon. Thomas should personally contact each client CEO today. These relationships need attention at the highest level. The next 2 weeks became a strategic chess match as Summit aggressively pursued our Midwest accounts, while we accelerated integration initiatives to demonstrate immediate value to those same clients. David clearly believed his personal relationships would override business considerations, a miscalculation that revealed how little he understood about enterprise procurement decisions. By month's end, we had retained 4 of the 5 targeted accounts, with the 5th agreeing to split their business between our company and Summit rather than switching completely. David's promised client exodus had failed to materialize, undermining his value proposition to his new employer. This professional victory coincided with a personal milestone. Jonathan and I were celebrating our first anniversary. Unlike my marriage, to David, which had been marked by elaborate displays that masked underlying discontent, my relationship with Jonathan was characterized by genuine partnership and mutual support. He surprised me with reservations at a small, innovative restaurant we'd been wanting to try, followed by tickets to a jazz performance at an intimate local venue. No ostentatious gestures, no public spectacle, just thoughtfully chosen experiences we could enjoy together. Over dinner, our conversation ranged across personal and professional topics with the easy rhythm we'd established from the beginning. Unlike David, who had always steered conversations toward himself and his accomplishments, Jonathan listened as intently as he spoke, genuinely interested in my thoughts and experiences. I have news, he mentioned as dessert arrived. I've been offered the CFO position at Tech Dynamics. It would mean relocating to their headquarters in Seattle. I felt a momentary tightness in my chest. After everything we'd built together over the past year, the thought of a cross-country separation was difficult to contemplate. That's an incredible opportunity, I said sincerely. Their growth trajectory is impressive, and they'd be lucky to have you. There's more to the offer, he continued. They're also interested in establishing a strategic partnership with RiverEdge Nexus to integrate your supply chain platform with their manufacturing technology. Their CEO specifically mentioned your reputation for innovation as a key factor. I set down my fork, intrigued by this unexpected development. That would expand our reach into an adjacent market segment we've been evaluating for months. Jonathan smiled. I know. That's partly why I wanted to discuss it with you before responding. This could be professionally advantageous for both of us, but personally challenging given the distance. I appreciated his directness, the way he laid out both opportunity and obstacle without manipulation or pressure. Another contrast to David, who would have either made unilateral decisions or used emotional leverage to influence mine. What's your initial thinking? I asked. That professional opportunities can be evaluated objectively, but what we've built together deserves careful consideration, he replied thoughtfully. Seattle and Boston aren't exactly neighbors, but strategic partnerships aren't the only arrangements that can work across distances. I reached across the table to take his hand. I think we should explore all aspects of this, the professional partnership potential for our companies and the personal logistics for us. Both matter. The conversation continued throughout the evening, not as a problem to be solved immediately, but as a new landscape of possibilities to be thoughtfully explored together. By the time we arrived at the jazz club, We had outlined preliminary approaches to both the business opportunity and our personal relationship. The contrast with my previous marriage couldn't have been starker. With David, major decisions had been presented as foregone conclusions or manipulative ultimatums. With Jonathan, even potentially life-changing opportunities became occasions for collaborative problem-solving and mutual support. As we listened to the music, his arm comfortably around my shoulders, I found myself reflecting on how completely my definition of partnership had evolved. The empire I'd built professionally had its parallel in the relationship I'd built personally. Both founded on authentic strength rather than fragile pretense. Both capable of weathering challenges rather than collapsing beneath them. The following morning, energized by our conversation and the possibilities it had revealed, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. To my surprise, Jessica was already there, working intently in one of the glass-walled conference rooms, multiple screens displaying data about our Midwest client retention efforts. "You're here early," I observed, pausing in the doorway. She looked up, momentarily startled. "Ms. Chen, good morning." "Yes. I received some concerning information late last night about Summit's latest approach to the Keller account. I wanted to analyze their proposal before our 9 a.m. meeting." I stepped into the room, curious. "What kind of approach?" "They've offered a pricing structure that appears significantly lower than ours on the surface," she explained, pulling up a detailed spreadsheet. "But I've identified several hidden costs buried in their service agreement that actually make their total package more expensive over the 3-year term." Her analysis was impressively thorough, highlighting exactly how Summit's deceptive pricing strategy would ultimately disadvantage the client. "This is excellent work," I acknowledged. "How did you obtain their proposal details?" A slight flush colored her cheeks. "I maintain good relationships with several contacts in Keller's procurement department. They value transparency and weren't comfortable with what they perceived as deliberately misleading terms in Summit's offer." I nodded, understanding the subtext. Jessica had cultivated her own professional network independent of David's influence. Relationships based on mutual respect rather than manipulation. Those authentic connections were now proving more durable than his charm offensive at Summit. "Prepare a side-by-side comparison for the meeting," I instructed. "Clear, factual, and focused on total cost of ownership, rather than headline pricing. No need to explicitly call out the deception. Just make the contrast undeniable." "Already underway," she confirmed, gesturing to another screen where a polished presentation was taking shape. "I've included implementation timelines and service level guarantees as additional comparison points." As I turned to leave, she added, "Ms. Chen, there's something else you should know. David has been personally contacting several Mid-Atlantic employees, attempting to recruit them to Summit, including me." I paused, processing this new information. "What's your assessment of the risk?" "Minimal for senior roles. They recognize the stability and growth potential here," she replied frankly. "Some mid-level managers might be vulnerable, particularly those who worked closely with David and haven't yet connected with our leadership team." "Thank you for the heads up," I said. "We'll accelerate our management integration sessions and ensure everyone understands their value in the combined organization." "For what it's worth," she added hesitantly. I declined his offer immediately. "I'm building something worthwhile here, something real." I recognized the sentiment, the desire to create authentic value rather than chase quick wins or false promises. "We appreciate your commitment, Ms. Davis. Your contributions haven't gone unnoticed." Later that day, after successfully countering Summit's proposal in the Keller meeting, I found myself reflecting on the parallel journeys Jessica and I had taken since David's betrayal had touched both our lives. We had each, in our own ways, transformed that painful experience into professional growth. She by rebuilding her reputation through consistent excellence, I by creating an enterprise that reflected my true capabilities rather than someone else's limitations. The retention task force meeting that afternoon brought more encouraging news. client retention across the integrated company had reached 96%, well above the industry average for post-acquisition periods. The feared exodus to Summit had largely failed to materialize, with only a handful of smaller accounts following David to his new employer. Summit's board is apparently questioning the value of their significant investment in poaching David, Michael reported, sharing intelligence from his industry contacts. Their Q3 projections have been revised downward after the expected client migration didn't materialize. Thomas Mitchell nodded in confirmation. My former counterpart at Summit called yesterday, ostensibly to catch up, but really to ask how we'd managed to retain the Keller account. Reading between the lines, David had promised them that relationship was a guaranteed win. I wasn't surprised. David had always been skilled at selling expectations he couldn't actually deliver, a pattern that had characterized both his professional approach and our marriage. The difference now was that his promises were being evaluated against measurable outcomes by people with significant financial investments at stake. Has there been any further recruitment activity targeting our employees? I asked, recalling Jessica's earlier warning. Some, Thomas acknowledged. But our retention bonuses and clear growth opportunities seem to be countering most overtures. The stability we've demonstrated during integration has been our best defense. As the meeting concluded, I realized that for the first time in months, David's name had been mentioned only in passing, as a minor competitive factor rather than a significant threat. His ability to impact our business trajectory was diminishing rapidly, relegating him to a peripheral figure in the industry narrative rather than a central character. That evening, I had dinner scheduled with Becca, our long overdue celebration of the successful acquisition. We met at her favorite restaurant, a converted warehouse with industrial chic decor and innovative cuisine that perfectly reflected her blend of business acumen and creative thinking. To the Empire Builder, she toasted, raising her glass as we settled at our table. From desperate SOS to industry domination in 3 short years, I'm not sure even I believed it would happen this fast. I laughed, clinking my glass against hers. You believed it before I did. That first day in your office, mapping the industry on your whiteboard, you saw possibilities I couldn't yet imagine. I saw the foundation, she corrected. You built the actual structure. And it's impressive, Em. Truly impressive. As we enjoyed our meal, catching up on both professional developments and personal milestones, Becca mentioned something unexpected. Did you know David reached out to me last month? Asked me to consult for Summit on their market realignment strategy, whatever that means. I nearly choked on my wine. Seriously? What did you say? She rolled her eyes expressively. I told him my consulting contract with River Edge Nexus includes a non-compete clause for directly competitive projects. Which is true, by the way. But even if it wasn't, I wouldn't work with him after what he did to you. Loyalty appreciated, but not necessary, I assured her. Business is business, though I am curious what he was hoping to accomplish. Based on our brief conversation, I think he's desperate to deliver some kind of win at Summit, Becca reflected. He mentioned countering the River Edge Nexus advantage multiple times. You've gotten under his skin professionally in a way that clearly bothers him. I considered this assessment thoughtfully. It's not personal, though. We're simply executing a better business strategy with more innovative technology and stronger client relationships. To you, it's not personal, Becca pointed out. To him, I suspect it's very personal indeed. You've succeeded where he's struggling. You've built what he couldn't. And you've done it all after he left you with nothing but debt and betrayal. That's got to be eating him alive. The thought hadn't occurred to me in quite those terms. I'd been so focused on building something meaningful that I'd rarely considered how David might perceive my success. Not from a revenge perspective. I'd moved beyond that motivation long ago, but simply as a stark contrast to his own diminishing professional trajectory. Well, that's his issue to manage, I said finally. I'm focused on our integration success and future growth opportunities, not David's emotional state. Becca grinned knowingly. And that, my friend, is exactly why you're thriving while he's floundering. You built an empire because you were focused on creation. He's struggling because he's focused on competition, specifically competing with you. Her observation stayed with me long after dinner concluded. There was truth in her assessment that I hadn't fully appreciated before. David's professional identity had always been wrapped up in status, in being perceived as successful rather than creating actual value. My focus on building something substantive represented an approach fundamentally different from his emphasis on appearance and position. The next morning brought news that crystallized this contrast perfectly. The trade publication Supply Chain Innovation had released its annual Industry Leaders issue, featuring a cover story on the River Edge Nexus acquisition of Mid-Atlantic and its market implications. The profile included an extended interview with me about our integration approach and strategic vision. More significant than the article itself was the industry response it generated. By mid-morning, my inbox contained multiple partnership inquiries from technology providers, manufacturing companies, and even a major logistics firm interested in exploring potential collaborations. Among these messages was one that stood out. For personal, rather than professional reasons, an email from Diana Chen, David's mother, with whom I'd had a warm relationship during our marriage, but no contact since our divorce. Dear Emily, I hope this message finds you well. I've been following your remarkable professional journey through industry publications, most recently the excellent Supply Chain Innovation profile. While I realize our family connection has been severed, I wanted to express my admiration for what you've built. Your success speaks to qualities I always recognized in you, even when others in the family may not have fully appreciated your potential and capabilities. David has shared some of his perspective on recent events, but I've learned over the years to see beyond my son's narratives to the broader truth. Whatever personal history exists between you, your professional accomplishments stand on their own considerable merits. Wishing you continued success, Diana Chen. I read the message twice, struck by its gracious tone and subtle acknowledgment of David's limitations. During our marriage, Diana had occasionally expressed gentle concern about her son's inflated self-assessment and tendency toward blame-shifting. This message suggested her maternal loyalty hadn't blinded her to the pattern that had ultimately damaged his career trajectory. After careful consideration, I composed a brief, equally respectful reply. Dear Diana, thank you for your kind message. Your good wishes mean a great deal to me. I've never forgotten your wisdom about building success through consistent value, creation rather than short-term appearances. That guidance has influenced my approach more than you might realize. I wish you and the family well. Warm regards, Emily. As I sent the reply, I reflected on how this small exchange represented yet another way my relationship with the past had evolved. 3 years ago, contact from David's family would have triggered emotional turmoil. Now it registered simply as an unexpected but welcome acknowledgment of my professional journey, requiring neither defensiveness nor detailed explanation. That same afternoon, Michael stopped by my office with news that further illustrated the shifting industry dynamics. Summit just announced a restructuring of their executive team, he reported, showing me the press release on his tablet. David's role has been redefined from VP of Client Relations to Regional Director of Midwest Sales, essentially a demotion back to his previous level. I scanned the carefully worded announcement, which attempted to frame the change as a strategic realignment, but couldn't completely disguise the clear reduction in responsibility and status. 3 months, I noted. That didn't take long. The board apparently lost confidence after the promised client acquisitions failed to materialize, Michael explained. Plus, there were some concerns about his approach to competitor information, suggestions that he might be using confidential data from Mid-Atlantic in inappropriate ways. I raised an eyebrow. Legal implications? Nothing formal yet, he replied, but enough concern that they've limited his access and authority while they conduct an internal review. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very behaviors that had characterized David's approach throughout his career, overpromising, underdelivering, and cutting ethical corners, were finally catching up with. I kept my expression neutral as I stared at David's LinkedIn notification. 3 years ago, that tiny digital footprint would have sent me into an emotional spiral. Now it was merely data, information that told me he was finally connecting the dots. My phone rang, displaying Maria's name on the screen. The Mid-Atlantic Board just unanimously approved the acquisition terms, she announced without preamble. It's happening, Emily. We're officially moving forward. Any unexpected resistance? I asked, swiveling in my chair to look out at the Boston skyline from my corner office, a view I'd earned through thousands of hours of strategic planning and relentless execution. None worth mentioning. Their leadership recognizes they've fallen too far behind to catch up on their own. She paused. There is one thing, though. HR finished their preliminary organizational assessment. David's position has been flagged as redundant. I closed my eyes briefly. This moment should have felt triumphant. Vindication served cold after years of dismissal and betrayal. Instead, I felt a strange detachment, as if David's fate belonged to a story I'd read long ago rather than lived. The decision needs to be based on business merit alone, I said finally. Have the integration team proceed with standard protocols. No special treatment, positive or negative. Understood, Maria replied. We're still on for the executive dinner tonight? The Mid-Atlantic C-suite seems eager to meet their new overlords. I smiled at her choice of words. Absolutely. Just make sure the seating chart keeps me away from the Midwest Regional Directors table. I don't need any awkward reunions before the deal officially closes. After hanging up, I opened my desk drawer and removed a worn leather journal, the first major purchase I'd made after opening my own bank account 3 years ago. Its pages chronicled my journey from that devastating Tuesday morning to today's acquisition announcement. The early entries were stained with teardrops and filled with raw pain. I flipped past those pages to a section dated about a month after discovering David's betrayal. Here, the handwriting became steadier, the thoughts more strategic. Met with Taylor Hopkins today, former Mid-Atlantic client who switched to Summit last year. Fascinating insights about internal dysfunction at MA. Apparently, regional directors, including David, have been misleading senior leadership about market conditions to protect their territories. Creating detailed map of client dissatisfaction. Points. I smiled, remembering that conversation. Taylor had been brutally honest, unaware of my connection to David, sharing information that would later become the foundation for Nexus's customer acquisition strategy. Those early reconnaissance meetings, conducted while I was still living in a studio apartment with secondhand furniture and working through my divorce, had given me an invaluable education in the industry's blind spots. Another entry, 3 months later. Maria identified critical weakness in Mid-Atlantic's West Coast expansion. Their distributor network has significant gaps in 3 major markets. If we can secure relationships with independent warehouses in those areas before they realize the problem, we can effectively block their growth while establishing our own presence. We had executed that plan flawlessly. By the time Mid-Atlantic recognized the strategic error, Nexus had already locked in exclusive contracts with the region's top distribution partners. Their expansion costs had doubled while delivering half the projected results. I closed the journal, no longer needing its reminders. What had begun as therapeutic documentation of my recovery had evolved into a strategic blueprint for dismantling David's professional world. Not out of vengeance, but because his company represented everything wrong with the industry: complacency, resistance to innovation, and an old boys network that valued relationships over results. My phone buzzed again, a text from Michael Torres, our original investor who now served on our board. Champagne ready for tonight. Also, did you see the stock price reaction to the announcement? Up 12% already. The market loves this move. I checked the trading app on my phone. He was right. The share price of River Edge Nexus had jumped significantly on news of the Mid-Atlantic acquisition. My equity stake, already substantial, had just increased in value by 7 figures in a single day, a brief flash of memory. David laughing at my suggestion that we invest my teaching bonus in the stock market rather than spending it on the luxury golf clubs he needed for client outings. "Stick to your books, Em," he'd said with that particular smile that masqueraded as affection while conveying contempt. "The market's not for amateurs." The irony wasn't lost on me. My assistant knocked gently on the doorframe. "Ms. Chen, your 3 o'clock is here. The integration team leads want to review the transition timeline." I straightened my blazer and closed the trading app. "Send them in, Alyssa. And could you confirm my dinner reservation with Jonathan for tomorrow night? It's our anniversary." She nodded, already tapping notes into her tablet. Another change from my previous life. Celebrating relationship milestones with a man who viewed my ambition as attractive rather than threatening. Jonathan and I had met 18 months ago at an industry conference where I was a featured speaker. As the CFO of a manufacturing technology company, he understood my work demands and supported my goals without competition or insecurity. The integration team filed in. 5 professionals whose expertise would ensure the Mid-Atlantic acquisition proceeded smoothly. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing department consolidations, customer retention strategies, and talent assessment protocols. When we reached the section about redundant positions, I maintained my professional detachment, asking only about the severance packages being offered. "The terms are generous," assured Karina from HR. 4 weeks of pay for every year of service, extended health benefits, and outplacement support. "Make it 6 weeks per year for anyone with over a decade at the company," I replied. "Many of these employees built their entire careers there. We want to be respected for how we handle this transition, not resented." Karina made the note, giving me a curious look. "That's unusually generous. The finance team won't be thrilled with the additional outlay." "Consider it an investment in our reputation," I said firmly. "Word travels fast in this industry. How we treat Mid-Atlantic employees today will affect our ability to recruit top talent tomorrow." After the meeting concluded, I had a brief window to prepare for the executive dinner. As I refreshed my makeup, I received a notification that David had also viewed my company bio on the corporate website. His digital footprints were becoming more frequent, breadcrumbs marking his path to realization. The executive dinner was held at Vincenzo's, an upscale Italian restaurant downtown with private dining rooms and discreet service. Perfect for sensitive business discussions and for avoiding uncomfortable encounters in the main dining area. I arrived deliberately late, giving Maria time to manage the initial introductions. When I entered the private room, conversations paused briefly as attendees turned to see the new arrival. I recognized most of Mid-Atlantic's executive team from our due diligence research. They, however, hadn't expected to see me. "Emily," Maria called, gesturing me over. "I was just telling Thomas about our customer experience platform." Thomas Mitchell is Mid-Atlantic's Chief Operating Officer. Thomas extended his hand. "Ms. Chen, your reputation precedes you. Maria was explaining how your innovations have transformed River Edge's client retention rates. Innovation is simply listening to customers and solving problems others ignore," I replied, shaking his hand firmly. "Something I believe we can bring to Mid-Atlantic's impressive client roster as well." Throughout dinner, I navigated conversations carefully, sharing our integration vision while gauging the executives' receptiveness to change. Most seemed cautiously optimistic, aware their company needed the lifeline our acquisition provided. Only Patricia Hammond, their chief marketing officer, displayed obvious resistance, peppering her comments with subtle digs about untested approaches and risking established relationships. As dessert was served, she finally asked the question I'd been expecting all evening. "Forgive me, but your name sounds familiar. Have you been in the industry long? I don't recall seeing you at the National Association meetings until recently." Before I could respond, Thomas jumped in. "Patricia, Emily built Nexus from scratch 3 years ago, then engineered the merger with River Edge that catapulted them past Summit into the number 2 market position. If you'd attended last year's Innovation Summit instead of sending your deputy, you'd have seen her keynote address on digital transformation." Patricia flushed slightly. "Of course, I just thought perhaps we'd met in another context." I smiled politely. "I don't believe so, though I do have some familiarity with Mid-Atlantic from the customer side. The insights helped shape Nexus's approach to service delivery." The conversation moved on, but I noticed Patricia typing something on her phone beneath the table. Within minutes, my own phone vibrated with a LinkedIn message notification from none other than David Chen. "We need to talk. Urgently." I silenced my phone without checking the message itself and rejoined the discussion about supply chain optimization opportunities. As the evening concluded, Michael raised his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings and successful partnerships," he said, his gaze sweeping the room before landing meaningfully on me. "And to Emily Chen, whose vision made this historic combination possible." The Mid-Atlantic executives joined the toast with varying degrees of enthusiasm. As we all stood to leave, Patricia approached me directly. "I just had the most interesting conversation with our Midwest regional director," she said, studying my reaction carefully. "Apparently, you and David Chen have some history." I met her gaze steadily. "Ancient history, Patricia, and entirely irrelevant to the business at hand." "He seems to think otherwise," she replied. "In fact, he's quite determined to speak with you." "That's unfortunate," I said calmly, "because I have nothing to say to him. If you'll excuse me, I need to speak with Michael about tomorrow's press briefing." I walked away, feeling her eyes on my back. David was clearly scrambling, reaching out to anyone who might give him access to me. His position, already flagged as redundant, would only become more precarious if he created complications for the acquisition. Later that night, after returning to my apartment, I finally opened his LinkedIn message. "Emily, I just learned about the acquisition. We need to talk immediately. There are things you don't understand about Mid-Atlantic's situation. Please call me. This is critical." I stared at the message, noting how even now, David positioned himself as the authority, the one with special knowledge I couldn't possibly comprehend without his explanation. Some patterns never change. After a moment's consideration, I typed a brief reply. "All communication regarding the acquisition should go through official channels as outlined in the announcement. Personal history has no bearing on business decisions." His response came almost instantly. "This isn't about personal history. This is about you deliberately targeting my company for some twisted revenge. I know what you're doing, Emily." I laughed aloud at the irony. For 3 years, I'd built something innovative and valuable, solving real problems for customers while creating opportunities for talented people like Maria who'd been overlooked. David's company was failing because of its own resistance to change, not because of any vendetta. Yet he could only interpret events through the lens of his own inflated self-importance, assuming my career choices revolved around him rather than my own ambitions. It was the same narcissism that had led him to believe I'd never discover his affair, never understand the financial mess he'd created, never build something of my own. I closed the message without responding and instead opened my email to review the final press statement for tomorrow's formal announcement. The language was carefully crafted to emphasize the strategic benefits of combining River Edge Nexus's digital innovation with Mid-Atlantic's established market presence. a forward-looking narrative focused on growth opportunities rather than Mid-Atlantic's recent struggles. My phone rang, Jonathan calling to wish me goodnight. "How did the dinner go?" he asked after we'd exchanged greetings. "Mostly as expected," I replied, settling onto my sofa. The usual mix of optimism and anxiety from the acquired team, though my past made an unexpected appearance. "David?" Jonathan guessed immediately. Unlike David, who demanded I stop talking about work at home, Jonathan actually listened when I shared professional challenges. His marketing executive connected the dots at dinner. Now he's sending desperate messages claiming I orchestrated the acquisition as revenge. Jonathan's laughter echoed through the phone. The idea that anyone would spend 3 years building a multi-million-dollar company just to get back at an ex is both absurd and oddly flattering to him. That's David in a nutshell. Everything must ultimately be about him. I sighed. The integration team has already identified his position as redundant. He'll likely be offered severance within the month. "How do you feel about that?" Jonathan asked, his tone gentle rather than probing. I considered the question carefully. Professionally, it's the right business decision. His division has underperformed for 7 consecutive quarters, personally. And I paused. I don't feel much of anything. That part of my life seems very far away now. After we said goodnight, I opened my journal again and made a new entry, possibly the last that would ever mention David. The acquisition becomes official tomorrow. David reached out, predictably seeing himself as the central character in a story that's actually about industrial innovation and market efficiency. 3 years ago, his betrayal seemed like the end of my world. Now it registers as merely the unwitting catalyst for everything I've built. There's a certain cosmic balance in that realization. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Symbolically, appropriate for what business news channels were already calling a watershed moment in our industry. I dressed carefully in a tailored navy suit, applied subtle makeup, and selected the simple pearl earrings that had become something of a signature in my professional profile photos. My driver arrived precisely at 7:30, giving us time to reach the downtown financial district before the morning press conference. As we passed through my former neighborhood, where David still lived in our old house, now significantly devalued due to deferred maintenance, I felt a momentary twinge of dissonance. How strange that I'd once believed my life couldn't exist beyond these familiar streets. The press conference venue was already buzzing with activity when I arrived. Journalists from trade publications and financial news outlets clustered near the stage, where a backdrop displayed the logos of both companies with the tagline, "Building the Future of Supply Chain Solutions." Michael greeted me near the entrance. "Ready for your star turn?" he asked with a grin. "The Wall Street Journal wants an exclusive interview afterward." "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, though I'd prefer we keep the focus on the business rationale rather than personal narratives. He nodded, understanding. "Agreed. Though I should warn you, PR spotted David trying to get into the venue earlier. Security turned him away since he's not on the approved executive list, but he was quite insistent." I took a deep breath, centering myself. "Thanks for the heads up. Let's proceed as planned." The announcement went smoothly. Michael opened with remarks about the strategic vision, followed by Thomas from Mid-Atlantic acknowledging the complementary strengths of both organizations. When my turn came to address the assembly, I spoke confidently about the integration, roadmap, and growth opportunities, deliberately avoiding any personal elements of the story. Afterward, as promised, I gave a brief interview to the Wall Street Journal reporter, focusing exclusively on market dynamics and technological innovation. She seemed mildly disappointed not to extract more personal color, but respected the boundaries I'd established. As the event concluded and attendees began dispersing, Maria approached with an uncomfortably familiar figure trailing behind her, Patricia Hammond, looking simultaneously smug and uncomfortable. "Emily, I apologize for the interruption," Maria began, her expression conveying silent warning. Patricia insisted on introducing you to one of her team members. I turned to find David standing there, still handsome in his custom suit, but noticeably tense. The confident swagger I remembered had diminished, replaced by an almost desperate intensity. His eyes locked on mine, searching for some reaction. Fear, anger, triumph, anything that would confirm his narrative that this was all about him. Instead, I extended my hand professionally. Mr. Chen, I understand you're Mid-Atlantic's Midwest Regional Director. Thank you for joining us today. His expression flickered with confusion at my formal tone. Emily, stop this. We need to talk. Privately, you can't just... All integration discussions will proceed through the appropriate channels, I interrupted smoothly. Your division head will be scheduling briefings next week to outline the transition process. David's face flushed. This isn't about the damn integration, and you know it. You engineered this whole thing to destroy me. Several heads turned at his raised voice. Patricia took a half step backward, suddenly looking less pleased with her maneuvering. Maria moved slightly closer to me, her posture protective. I kept my voice calm and measured. Mr. Chen, this acquisition represents a $425 million transaction approved by both companies' boards and shareholders. It addresses critical market dynamics and technological innovation needs. The suggestion that it was motivated by personal history rather than sound business strategy is both inaccurate and inappropriate in this professional setting. David stepped closer, lowering his voice but maintaining its intensity. You expect me to believe this is coincidence? You build a competing company out of nowhere, then target the exact firm where I've spent my entire career? Don't insult my intelligence, Emily. Your intelligence isn't my concern, I replied evenly. The integration timeline, however, is. If you'll excuse me, I have a meeting with our financial team to prepare for tomorrow's shareholder briefing. As I turned to leave, David reached for my arm, not forcefully, but enough to make Maria step forward with a warning glance. He immediately withdrew his hand. I built that Midwest territory from nothing, he said, desperation creeping into his voice. 15 years of client relationships. You can't just erase that. For a brief moment, I felt an unexpected flicker of sympathy. Not for the man who had betrayed and deceived me, but for someone facing the same fear and uncertainty he'd once inflicted on me. The sudden realization that everything you've built might be swept away in an instant. No one is erasing your contributions, Mr. Chen, I said, softening my tone slightly. The integration team will be evaluating all positions based on performance metrics and organizational needs. Your regional results will speak for themselves. The momentary vulnerability in his expression hardened into something colder. So that's how it's going to be? Hiding behind corporate speak while you systematically dismantle my career? That's enough, Maria interjected firmly. This is neither the time nor place for personal discussions. Mr. Chen, I suggest you return to your office and await further communication from the transition team. David held my gaze for one more moment before turning abruptly and walking away. Patricia, looking thoroughly uncomfortable with how her little scheme had played out, mumbled an apology and hurried after him. Well, Maria said quietly as we watched them leave. That was about as awkward as expected. Actually, I replied, it went better than I anticipated. No scene, no shouting, just the usual David, making everything about himself. Michael joined us, having observed the exchange from a distance. Everything okay over here? That looked intense. Just a former regional director concerned about the future, I said, deliberately keeping my explanation professional. Nothing unexpected during an acquisition of this scale. But as we left the venue, I couldn't help reflecting on the exchange. For 3 years, I'd channeled my pain and betrayal into building something meaningful. I'd transformed myself from a financially naive teacher into a respected business leader. Yet in those few minutes with David, I'd glimpsed how differently we'd processed the same history. In his mind, my success could only be a weapon aimed at him, not an achievement built despite him. Back at the office, I found an email from Jonathan waiting. Saw the press conference live stream. You were brilliant, poised, articulate, and completely in command. Dinner reservations confirmed for 8 p.m. Proud of you, always. His simple affirmation provided the perfect counterpoint to David's desperate accusations. Where David saw threats, Jonathan saw accomplishments. Where David assumed revenge, Jonathan recognized strategy and vision. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings, interviews, and conference calls as both organizations began the complex work of becoming one unified company. By late afternoon, I was reviewing organizational charts with Maria and the HR leadership team, mapping out the new reporting structure. We've identified 42 positions with direct overlap, explained Karina from HR, highlighting sections of the IVE document. Most critical are these 8 regional directors who essentially cover the same territories. I studied the chart, noting David's name among the Midwest leadership. What are the performance comparisons for these positions? Karina pulled up another document. We've done side-by-side analyses based on the past 8 quarters. The River Edge regional directors outperform their Mid-Atlantic counterparts in 6 of the 8 territories, including the Midwest. The exceptions are the Southeast and Northwest regions, where Mid-Atlantic has stronger client relationships and better penetration in key accounts. So, we're looking at retaining 2 Mid-Atlantic regional directors and transitioning the other 6? I asked, keeping my tone neutral despite seeing David's performance metrics ranked second to last among his peers. That's our preliminary recommendation, Karina confirmed. Though we should note that David Chen has the longest tenure, which complicates the decision somewhat. He's been with Mid-Atlantic for 15 years. Maria glanced at me discreetly, clearly wondering how I would handle this particular decision. I maintained my professional demeanor, focused solely on the business factors. Tenure is valuable, but not at the expense of results, I said firmly. The recommendation stands based on performance data. Please ensure the severance packages for transitioning directors reflect their years of service, as we discussed previously. As the meeting concluded, Maria lingered behind. That couldn't have been easy, she said quietly. It was a straightforward business decision, I replied, gathering my notes. His numbers don't justify retention, regardless of our history. That's true, she acknowledged. But it's also true that most people in your position might have recused themselves from that particular decision, given the personal connection. I considered her point. Perhaps, but recusing myself would imply that personal history might cloud my judgment. I've worked too hard to establish my professional credibility to undermine it now. Maria smiled. And that, Emily, is exactly why you're leading this integration instead of sitting on the sidelines. Your ability to separate personal feelings from business decisions is remarkable and rare. After she left, I sat alone in the conference room, reflecting on her words. The truth was more complex than I'd admitted. Yes, I could make objective decisions about David's professional fate based solely on performance data. But I couldn't pretend our history had no emotional impact. Seeing him today, his desperate attempt to confront me, his struggle to understand how completely the power dynamic between us had shifted, had stirred complicated feelings. Not romantic ones, certainly. Those had died long before his affair, suffocated by years of condescension and control. But human ones, recognition of his fear, memory of shared history, acknowledgment of how thoroughly our paths had diverged. My phone buzzed with a text from Becca. Just saw the acquisition announcement. Full circle moment, huh? Drinks soon to celebrate properly? I smiled, remembering that first day in her office when she'd mapped out the industry on her whiteboard. She'd seen potential in me when I could barely see a future at all. The contrast between her confidence in me and David's dismissal couldn't have been starker. As I gathered my things to leave for dinner with Jonathan, my assistant Alyssa appeared in the doorway. "Ms. Chen, sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation downstairs. Security called up. Mr. Chen is in the lobby, insisting on seeing you. He's becoming disruptive." I sighed, checking my watch. Still an hour before I needed to meet Jonathan. "Tell security I'll be down shortly. And Alyssa, please call Thomas Mitchell at Mid-Atlantic. He should be aware of the situation." The elevator ride to the lobby gave me time to prepare mentally. I wasn't angry with David. That emotion had burned itself out long ago. I wasn't afraid of him either, but I was determined not to let his personal crisis disrupt the delicate integration process that would affect thousands of employees. When the elevator doors opened, I spotted him immediately, standing by the security desk, gesturing emphatically to a stone-faced guard. His tie was loosened, his normally perfect hair slightly disheveled. He'd clearly been drinking, though not enough to be truly impaired. "Mr. Chen," I said, approaching calmly, "this isn't appropriate behavior in a corporate environment." He turned at the sound of my voice, eyes narrowing. "Now you'll talk to me? After sending your HR minions to evaluate my performance metrics?" I gestured toward a small seating area away from the security desk and curious onlookers. "Let's sit down. 5 minutes? Then you need to leave." Surprisingly, he followed without argument, collapsing into one of the modernist chairs with uncharacteristic heaviness. Up close, I could see the strain of recent weeks etched in his face, the uncertainty of the acquisition compounded by today's realization of my role in it. "Just tell me one thing," he said, his voice lower now, intense, rather than aggressive. "Was all this really about getting back at me? 3 years planning the perfect revenge?" I studied him for a moment, struck by how genuinely he seemed to believe this narrative, that my entire professional journey had been orchestrated around him, rather than in spite of him. "David," I said, using his first name deliberately, "contrary to what you might believe, this acquisition has nothing to do with our history. River Edge Nexus needed Mid-Atlantic's market presence and client roster to compete effectively against industry consolidation. Mid-Atlantic needed our technology platform and innovation capabilities to remain relevant. It's business, not personal." He shook his head, unconvinced. "You expect me to believe that, after what I did?" "What you did," I replied evenly, "was show me exactly who you were. The affair, the financial deception, they were painful revelations, yes. But they also freed me from a relationship that had been constraining me for years. In a strange way, I should thank you." His expression shifted from disbelief to confusion. "Thank me? I destroyed your life." "No," I corrected him. "You disrupted it. I rebuilt it. Stronger, more authentic, and ultimately more successful than I could have imagined while living in your shadow. That's not revenge, David. That's growth." He stared at me for a long moment, searching for something in my expression. Perhaps the anger or bitterness he expected, or the vulnerability he remembered. Finding neither, he seemed almost deflated. "So what happens now?" he asked finally. "To me? To my position?" "The same thing that happens to everyone during an acquisition," I replied honestly. "Your role will be evaluated based on performance metrics, territorial needs, and organizational structure. The decision will be made by the integration team, not by me personally." "But you know what they'll decide," he pressed. "My numbers haven't been great since." Since Jessica had been transferred and his personal life had imploded. Since the rumors about their affair had damaged his credibility with clients. Since he'd lost the supportive wife who had once managed his home, boosted his confidence, and covered for his inadequacies. "The severance package will be generous," I said, neither confirming nor denying his unfinished statement. 6 weeks, for every year of service, plus extended benefits. The outplacement services are excellent. They've had success placing executives throughout the industry. He laughed without humor. That's it? 15 years reduced to a severance calculation? That's business, I replied simply. Just as it was business when you pursued Jessica while charging jewelry and vacations to our joint accounts. Just as it was business when you forged my signature on loan documents. We all make choices, David. These are the consequences of yours. Security approached discreetly, responding to my subtle signal. Ms. Chen, is everything all right here? Yes, thank you, I responded. Mr. Chen was just leaving. David stood, straightening his tie with a gesture that seemed like muscle memory, a reflexive attempt to reassemble his professional persona. You've changed, Emily. Yes, I agreed. That's what growth looks like. As security escorted him toward the exit, he turned back once. For what it's worth. I'm sorry. Not just for the affair, but for underestimating you. I never saw what you were capable of. Neither did I replied honestly. Until I had no choice but to find out. After he was gone, I took a moment to collect myself before texting Jonathan. Running a few minutes late, minor situation at the office. His response came immediately. No problem. Take your time. The reservation is secure. I headed back, upstairs to retrieve my things, feeling strangely lighter after the encounter. For 3 years, I'd focused so intently on moving forward that I'd rarely looked back to measure the distance traveled. Seeing David today, diminished, desperate, still trapped in old patterns of thinking, had provided that perspective. My assistant looked up anxiously as I returned. Everything okay? Security called to say Mr. Chen left without further incident. Everything's fine, I assured her, gathering my coat and bag. Just an unexpected closure to an old chapter. The Wall Street Journal piece just went live online, she added, handing me a printout. They're calling you the industry's most unexpected disruptor. Thought you'd want to see it before dinner. I glanced at the headline. From classroom to boardroom, how Emily Chen is transforming an industry. The article opened with a brief mention of my career change, noting only that a personal upheaval 3 years ago prompted Chen to reevaluate her professional path, before diving into the business strategy behind Nexus's rise and the industry. Implications of the Mid-Atlantic acquisition. No mention of revenge. No framing of my success as a response to betrayal. Just recognition of vision, execution, and results. As I headed out to meet Jonathan, my phone buzzed with a final email notification, a message from Thomas Mitchell. Wanted you to know that David Chen has submitted his resignation, effective immediately. He declined the option to stay through the transition period. Thought. You should be aware before tomorrow's integration meetings. I wasn't surprised. David had always avoided difficult situations when he couldn't control the narrative. His resignation was one last attempt to frame his departure on his terms rather than accept the inevitable performance-based termination. At dinner, Jonathan listened attentively as I recounted the day's events, including the unexpected confrontation with David. How do you feel about his resignation? He asked, refilling my wine glass. I considered the question carefully. Professionally, it simplifies the integration process. Personally, I paused. I think it's fitting. He walked away when things got challenging 3 years ago. Some patterns never change. Jonathan raised his glass. To patterns broken and new ones created. You've built something remarkable, Emily. Not just a business empire, but a life defined by your terms. As we clinked glasses, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 3 years ago, I'd stood in my kitchen staring at a bank alert, discovering the first thread of a deception that would unravel my entire life. Today, I sat across from a man who valued my strength rather than feared it, celebrating an acquisition that would transform an industry. David had left me with nothing but debt and betrayal. He never expected me to build an empire while he was gone. But perhaps the greatest revenge wasn't the acquisition of his company or the effective end of his career. It was the simple fact that when presented with the opportunity for vindictive triumph, I'd chosen professional integrity instead. The real victory wasn't over David. It was over the version of myself who had once believed his limitations defined my possibilities. That Emily was gone forever, replaced by a woman who understood that sometimes rock bottom becomes the solid foundation on which you build something extraordinary. Later that night, I made one final entry in my leather journal, the last that would ever mention David Chen. Encountered D today. Twice, actually. The acquisition announcement brought him out of the woodwork, convinced this was all about him. 15 years of condescension, followed by betrayal and abandonment, and still he can't comprehend that my success exists independently of his narrative. His resignation simplifies the integration, but changes nothing fundamental about our trajectory. His parting words have stayed with me, though. I never saw what you were capable of. Perhaps that was his greatest failing. Not the affair or the financial deception, but the fundamental inability to see me clearly, to recognize potential beyond his own reflection. Tomorrow begins the real work of merging these companies and cultures. Whatever closure today provided is secondary to the responsibility we now shoulder for thousands of employees and their families. The past has no place in that future. I closed the journal and placed it in my bedside drawer. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, integration timelines, organizational adjustments, cultural alignment between two formerly competing workforces. Important work that deserved my full attention and energy. David Chen belonged to a chapter that was now finally, definitively closed. The empire I'd built hadn't been constructed as a monument to past injuries, but as a platform for future possibilities, not just for me, but for everyone who worked under its banner. As I drifted toward sleep, I remembered something Becca had said during those early, desperate days when I was still reeling from discovery and betrayal. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads you directly to the best thing that could ever happen. She'd been right. The debt, the betrayal, the complete dismantling of my previous life. All of it had been necessary to reveal what I was truly capable of building. Not just a company, but a complete transformation. From financially naive to industry leader. From betrayed wife to empowered executive. From living someone else's definition of success to creating my own. The next morning, I woke before my alarm, energized despite the emotional toll of the previous day. The sunlight streamed through my bedroom windows, real, actual windows that faced east, a non-negotiable feature when I'd purchased this apartment. David had always insisted on blackout curtains, claiming morning light disrupted his sleep. Just one of countless small compromises I'd made without questioning. I followed my usual morning routine: 30 minutes of yoga, a light breakfast while reviewing overnight emails, and a careful selection of my wardrobe for the day. Today, I chose a structured crimson dress with a matching blazer, bold, confident colors for what would be the first full day of integration planning. My phone lit up with a text from Maria. News of David's resignation spreading through Mid-Atlantic. Their management team seems relieved rather than concerned. Interesting dynamics emerging. See you at 9. I wasn't surprised. Despite his territorial protectiveness about the Midwest region, David had never been particularly collaborative with his peers or supportive of company-wide initiatives that didn't directly benefit his division. His absence would likely simplify certain aspects of the cultural integration. As my driver navigated morning traffic, I reviewed the agenda for today's leadership summit. Both companies' executive teams would be meeting to align on integration priorities, communication strategies, and preliminary organizational structure. Without David present, the Mid-Atlantic regional directors would be represented by their VP of Sales Operations, someone who, according to our research, was actually more innovative and adaptable than his regional directors. The summit venue was a neutral location, a conference center downtown rather than either company's headquarters, deliberately chosen to symbolize the collaborative nature of the integration. When I arrived, most participants were already mingling over coffee. Small clusters of River Edge Nexus and Mid-Atlantic executives cautiously getting acquainted. Thomas Mitchell spotted me immediately and broke away from his group to approach. "Emily, good morning. I wanted to personally apologize for yesterday's incident. David's behavior was completely unacceptable." "No apology necessary," I assured him. "Acquisitions create stress and uncertainty. Some people handle it better than others." Thomas hesitated. "I should mention, there have been rumors circulating about your prior connection to David. Nothing specific, just whispers. That you knew each other before the acquisition." I maintained my professional composure, though internally I'd been expecting this. "Yes, David and I were married several years ago. We've been divorced for 3 years. I didn't mention it during due diligence because it had no bearing on the strategic rationale for the acquisition, and I wanted evaluation of both companies to proceed on purely business merits." Thomas nodded, relief evident in his expression. "Thank you for your transparency. For what it's worth, I agree completely with your approach. Personal history shouldn't factor into business decisions of this magnitude." "The board was fully informed," I added, "and I've recused myself from any personnel decisions specifically involving David's position, though that point is moot now given his resignation." "Understood." Thomas gestured toward the main conference room. "Shall we get started? The teams are eager to move forward." The day's sessions were productive, marked by the kind of cautious optimism typical of early integration efforts. The Mid-Atlantic team seemed genuinely impressed by our technology platform demonstrations, while our team recognized the value of their established client relationships and distribution network. By mid-afternoon, we'd established joint working groups for each major functional area and agreed on a communication timeline for employees and customers. During the final wrap-up session, Patricia Hammond, notably more subdued than at last night's dinner, raised her hand. "I have a question about messaging. How transparent should we be about the financial pressures that led to this acquisition? Some of our long-term clients might be concerned about service continuity." It was an important question, but the subtext was clear. How would we frame Mid-Atlantic's market position decline that had made them acquisition targets rather than acquirers? "Excellent point," I acknowledged. "We should be truthful without being alarmist. This combination represents opportunity, not desperation. Mid-Atlantic brings tremendous value through its market presence and client relationships. River Edge Nexus brings technological innovation and operational efficiency. Together, we're stronger than either company could be independently. That's the message we should consistently deliver." Michael nodded approvingly from across the table. "Exactly right. This isn't about one company rescuing another. It's about creating an industry leader that can serve clients more effectively than either company could alone." As the session concluded and participants began gathering their materials, Maria approached with a thoughtful expression. "That was masterful," she said quietly, "especially given the circumstances." "Just focusing on what matters," I replied, collecting my notes. "The success of this integration affects thousands of people. Personal history is irrelevant compared to that responsibility." "Speaking of personal history," Maria hesitated, "there's something you should know. Jessica, David's former assistant, now works in Mid-Atlantic's marketing department. She was apparently transferred there after their involvement became problematic." I absorbed this information with mild surprise. "Does she fall within a division that's flagged for restructuring?" "No," Maria confirmed. "Her current role in digital marketing actually aligns with areas we're planning to expand. Based purely on departmental planning, her position would likely be retained. Then we proceed accordingly, I said simply. Her personal history with David has no bearing on organizational decisions, just as my history doesn't. Maria studied me for a moment. You continue to impress me, Emily. Most people couldn't separate the personal and professional so effectively. Later that evening, as I returned to my apartment, I reflected on Maria's comment. The truth was, maintaining that separation hadn't always been easy. During those first few months after discovering David's betrayal, I'd cycled through all the expected emotions: devastation, rage, vindictiveness, grief. There had been days when I'd fantasized about revenge, about making him feel as small and insignificant as he'd made me feel. But something unexpected had happened as I'd immersed myself in building Nexus. The more I'd focused on creating rather than destroying, on looking forward rather than backward, the less emotional energy I'd had available for resentment. Success, it turned out, was not just the best revenge, it was also the best healing. My doorman greeted me as I entered the lobby. "Evening, Ms. Chen. These were delivered for you about an hour ago." He handed me a small package and an envelope. Upstairs, I opened the envelope first. Inside was a handwritten note from Jonathan. "Celebrating your first day of creating something entirely new from two established parts. The symbolism seemed appropriate. Dinner tomorrow? Jay." The package contained a beautiful crystal vase with an innovative design, two distinct shapes merging seamlessly into a harmonious whole. It was exactly the kind of thoughtful gesture that characterized our relationship. Meaningful, rather, than extravagant, supportive, rather than showy. I placed the vase on my mantel and poured myself a glass of wine, settling on my sofa to review emails before dinner. Among the dozens of messages about the integration was one that caught my attention. Immediately. The sender, Jessica Davis. Subject, regarding yesterday's announcement. My finger hovered over the delete button momentarily. Whatever drama existed between Jessica and David was their business, not mine. But professional courtesy prevailed, and I opened the message. "Ms. Chen, I'm writing regarding my position in Mid-Atlantic's digital marketing department. I understand you are leading the integration efforts following the acquisition announcement. While I don't expect you to have personal knowledge of junior staff positions, I wanted to proactively address what you may have heard about me. 2. Years ago, I made the significant error of becoming involved with David Chen while serving as his assistant. The relationship was a mistake on multiple levels, both professional and personal. Since then, I've worked diligently to rebuild my professional reputation in my current role. I don't seek special consideration during the integration process. I only ask that my current performance be evaluated independently of past mistakes. My digital marketing campaigns have consistently outperformed targets, as reflected in my performance reviews. Regardless of your decision, I respect the remarkable company you've built and the opportunity this acquisition represents for both organizations. Sincerely, Jessica Davis." I read the email twice, struck by its directness and professionalism. No excuses, no emotional appeals, just acknowledgement of past mistakes and focus on current contributions. It displayed more maturity than I would have expected from the woman whose Instagram posts had first alerted me to David's betrayal. After considering carefully, I composed a brief reply. "Ms. Davis, thank you for your forthright communication. All retention decisions during the integration will be based on current performance metrics, departmental needs, and organizational structure, not on personal history of any kind. Your position will be evaluated according to the same criteria as all other employees in comparable roles. The digital marketing function is actually one we've identified for potential expansion, given its strategic importance to our combined growth strategy. I appreciate your professionalism in addressing this matter directly. Regards, Emily Chen." After sending the response, I realized how much my perspective had evolved. 3 years ago, I'd felt intense anger toward Jessica, the other woman, the accomplice in David's betrayal. Now I could view her more objectively. A young professional who'd made poor choices, but appeared to be working to rebuild her career. Her past relationship with David was ultimately irrelevant to her current job performance or future potential contributions to the combined company. That night, as I prepared for bed, my phone lit up with a news alert. Mid-Atlantic Supply's Regional Director David Chen joins competitor Summit Distribution. The brief article noted that Summit, now our third largest competitor, had appointed David as their new VP of Client Relations, effective immediately. I wasn't surprised. David had always been skilled at leveraging his network, and Summit would likely see value in his knowledge of Mid-Atlantic's client relationships. What they might not fully appreciate was his resistance to innovation and tendency to prioritize short-term results over strategic growth. I forwarded the article to Maria and Michael with a brief note. FYI, legal should review his non-compete provisions. Also, let's accelerate our client retention outreach for the Midwest region. Then I put my phone away and turned off the lights. Tomorrow would be another full day of integration planning, another step forward in building something even stronger than what we'd created before. As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself reflecting on the strange symmetry of the situation. David had once left me with nothing but debt and betrayal. Now he was leaving Mid-Atlantic just before its transformation into something more valuable and innovative than it had been before. Once again, his departure would be the prelude to rebuilding and growth. Once again, what he abandoned would flourish, without him. That thought carried me into a deep, peaceful sleep. The rest of someone who knows exactly who she is and where she's going. The next 6 weeks of integration planning passed in a blur of activity. From morning strategy sessions to evening client receptions, every day brought new challenges and opportunities as we merged two distinct organizations into a cohesive whole. David's abrupt departure for Summit created some initial client uncertainty in the Midwest region, but our team moved quickly to demonstrate the enhanced capabilities the acquisition would bring to those relationships. What surprised me most was how seamlessly the two company cultures began blending. Despite their different origins, River Edge Nexus built on innovation and agility, Mid-Atlantic on tradition and relationships, the employees found common ground in their commitment to client service and industry expertise. Where we'd anticipated resistance, we often found enthusiasm for the fresh perspectives each team brought to long-standing challenges. One morning, about 2 months after the acquisition announcement, Maria stopped by my office with an unexpected update. "You'll never guess who's become one of our strongest internal advocates for the integration," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Jessica Davis." I looked up from my computer, intrigued. "Really? How so?" "She's been instrumental in helping our digital marketing team understand Mid-Atlantic's client communication preferences. Plus, she's created a series of internal content pieces showcasing successful collaboration between the legacy teams." Maria handed me a tablet, displaying one of these communications, a well-designed infographic highlighting early integration wins. She has a real talent for translating complex changes into clear messaging. I studied the content, impressed by its strategic approach and visual appeal. Has she been working with the cross-functional team on client retention in the Midwest? Maria nodded. "That's actually where she's making the biggest impact. Turns out she has significant insight into those client relationships, despite never being officially part of the sales organization." "Interesting," I murmured, connecting dots that had previously remained separate in my mind. Jessica had been David's assistant during his client meetings, likely present for countless interactions that gave her visibility into account dynamics he had jealously guarded as his exclusive domain. "There's more," Maria continued. She approached me yesterday with detailed documentation of service issues David had been concealing from both clients and management. Apparently, he had a practice of making promises to key accounts that operations couldn't actually fulfill, then blaming implementation teams when delivery fell short. This pattern sounded all too familiar. David creating unsustainable expectations, then deflecting responsibility when reality inevitably fell short. It was the same dynamic that had characterized our marriage. Grandiose claims followed by elaborate excuses. How is she positioning this information? I asked carefully. That's the most impressive part, Maria replied, not as an expose of David's practices, but as an opportunity to proactively address service gaps these clients have been experiencing. She's drafted communication plans for each account that acknowledge past issues while highlighting our enhanced capabilities post-acquisition. I leaned back in my chair, thoughtfully tapping my pen against the desk. Bring her into the Midwest Client Retention Task Force officially. If she has insights that can help stabilize those relationships, we should leverage that knowledge. Later that week, I observed Jessica's first presentation to the task force, a comprehensive analysis of 5 key accounts at risk following David's departure for Summit. Her understanding of client pain points was remarkably nuanced, and her DCO proposed solutions demonstrated genuine strategic thinking rather than quick fixes. When the session concluded, I approached her directly, our first face-to-face interaction since the acquisition. Up close, she looked different from the carefully filtered Instagram images I remembered from 3 years ago. More professional, certainly, but also more substantial somehow, less focused on projection and more on presence. That was an excellent presentation, Ms. Davis, I said, extending my hand. Your insights into the Keller manufacturing relationship were particularly valuable. She accepted the handshake with composed professionalism. Thank you, Ms. Chen. I've been working with their procurement team for nearly 2 years on digital integration options. They've been frustrated by the lack of progress. And yet they've remained with Mid-Atlantic despite these frustrations, I observed. Jessica met my gaze directly. They stayed because David repeatedly promised solutions were coming. The reality is that our combined company can actually deliver what he could only promise. That's what I've been trying to communicate to them since the acquisition announcement. Her candor was refreshing, as was her focus on solutions rather than personalities. Whatever personal agenda she might have had regarding David seemed subordinate to her professional commitment to client relationships. I'd like you to join the presentation team for the Keller account review next week, I decided. Your historical knowledge of their concerns, combined with your understanding of our new capabilities, could be pivotal in retaining their business. I'd be happy to, she replied, then hesitated briefly before adding, Ms. Chen, I want to thank you for judging me on my current contributions rather than past mistakes. Not everyone would be so objective given the circumstances. I considered my response carefully. The past only matters insofar as we learn from it, Ms. Davis. Your work demonstrates that you have. That's what counts in this organization. As she gathered her materials to leave, I found myself reflecting on the strange path that had brought us both to this moment. 3 years ago, we had been unwitting participants in David's deceptions, she as the other woman, I as the unsuspecting wife. Now we were colleagues focused on building something valuable from the company he had abandoned. That evening, over dinner with Jonathan, I shared the unexpected development. Of all the scenarios I envisioned for this acquisition, working alongside Jessica Davis was never one of them. Jonathan, ever thoughtful, considered this with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. Life has a remarkable way of creating unlikely allies. Is it uncomfortable? Surprisingly, no, I admitted. She's genuinely talented and clearly committed to rebuilding her professional reputation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.